New tariffs went into effect Sunday night, and among those most exposed, Apple, which is down pre-market trade. Joining us now to discuss, Chris Caso, analyst at Raymond James. Chris, great to have you with us.
Thank you.
This round of tariffs that's impacting Apple, it's a much smaller slice of products than what could hit Apple come December 15th. So how should we think about the impact on Apple of this first round?
I don't think it's going to have a big impact right now. Again, they delayed some things to December so that it avoided the Christmas rush. Also this year, there were some tax changes in China earlier the year that have benefited them. So, there's been a little push and pull. Obviously, the tariff stuff has been very difficult to handicap at this point.
So from your understanding, if I'm buying an watch today, right, do I see any price increase? And if I don't see a price increase, who is paying the tariff?
Right. So there's no price increase right now. Obviously, you have the event next week where they'll announce new products and they'll set pricing for that product. And you'd have to imagine that Apple would take that into consideration when they set the pricing. Because usually what Apple does, they set the pricing on the launch of new products, and it's very rare they change it. Again, one of the things they changed earlier this year was in China, where they did some price reductions, which was really atypical for them.
So that whole thing, the product announcements on September 10th, is that just a way to keep ASPs high, to keep margins high by introducing new products they can introduce at a higher price point and absorb the tariffs into?
Well, it's possible. And that's probably the biggest wild card. Whenever you have these new Apple events, there's very little mystery about what actually gets announced because there's been so many leaks. So we know there's, 3 new phones coming. There's a new camera on the back. Not much more. But pricing is one of the things that we certainly will watch, for one, because of the tariffs, and other, because Apple has seemed to have taken a more flexible approach this year as compared to the past. And perhaps it was some admission that the price of the new phones was too high in the first place.
Is there anything exciting coming next week? I like this. I love this stuff. I'm a gadget guy.
Right.
So is there anything I should be excited about?
Well, not really. And, I say, years past, gadget guys like us, that event was sort of like the Super Bowl.
Yes.
And it's sort of been like the Super Bowl now, which is not that interesting the last couple of years. And so there's very little mystery. And this is the issue for right now. There's not a lot of incentive to buy a new phone this year. But, and I said, we got positive a couple months ago on, very early ahead of next year's 5G cycle. I think that's where it's going to be interesting.
So nothing interesting in terms of this phone. You might alienate customers further because the price is much higher on this new batch of phones. How does this set up Apple for the holiday season? Last holiday season, Apple had a pretty dismal one, and it also saw weakness in China. What we're seeing in China so far is we're seeing a place where PMIs are in contraction, where retail sales in July for Hong Kong, because of all the protests, are down 11%. I mean, how does this all factor in for what you're forecasting?
Yeah, I think the next 6 months are going to be difficult 6 months for them. I frankly think that's very widely expected at this point because everybody knows what's coming out.
Meaning it's in the stock price.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's no surprise to investors. There are not very high expectations for this particular product launch. And in fact, I think probably the tougher time as you go into the calendar first quarter of the year, after you get through the holiday season, and then you have a stall ahead of a new batch of phones in next fall. But again, I think people understand that now. And at some point, our view, when we upgraded the stock 2 months ago, was that, we understand we have that difficult 6-9 month period coming. I think everyone understands it. And, our view is we'd rather be early on the call rather than be late on the call. And again, the biggest swing factor here is potentially what happens with the trade situation. That's impossible to predict.
In terms of the December 15th tariffs, how does that hit EPS, if it does at all in your model?
Yeah, we don't know just yet. And again, I think right now it's way too early to even kind of start putting that into numbers because, between now and December, we could have, we probably will have, a couple dozen tweets between now and then that may change things. I
get that. But if you're getting positive on the stock, shouldn't you have an understanding of what the worst case scenario impact would be?
Well, and I think we have to see what they do with pricing on this particular launch, and to understand, how much gets absorbed by suppliers, how much gets absorbed by Apple themselves. And again, when they set the prices on September 10th, that will tell you what's going to happen for this entire cycle, because it's very rare for them to change prices through the cycle.
But they did it for the last cycle. They changed prices, right?
And they did it in China and some other emerging markets, which was very unusual for them. Now, one of the things they potentially do is, just not change prices at all. and absorb them, and
we'll see it in the margins.
And then you'll see it in the margins. But one of the things interesting with Apple too is the margins on iPhones have already come down pretty considerably. And that's probably given them some flexibility with pricing. Again, part of the positive thesis as you go into next year is that they're going to have more compelling phones. They probably have some flexibility to put, some price increases in for a 5G phone as well, which could start to move margins in the other direction for iPhone.
Why are margins coming down, giving it more flexibility in price? I would think it gives it less flexibility.
Well, again, in this particular year, for this year, the cost of the phones is not going up. The cost of the phones most likely come down. Things like memory prices have come down, which gives them some cost benefit. When you go to next year, the 5G phone, the pricing will go up again.
Right.
But the other problem that Apple has had, which is something the 5G phone will fix next year, is mix. And the biggest issue you've had is not necessarily the prices of the phones themselves, but the fact that people are buying fewer of the high-end phones, more of the lower-end phones, which is the biggest driver of margins for iPhones. So as you go to next year, if more people buy the equivalent of, the XS and the Max as opposed to, the N-1, the last year phone. That's a big factor in both ASPs as well as margins for iPhone. And I think that's what's going to happen as you go to next year. So again, you got to get past this next 6 to 9 month period where the mix is probably lousy. You got some pressure from tariffs and that. But when you go to next year, at least you've got several things lined up which could act as a positive catalyst.
Do you think we'll ever have transparency or you'll have transparency as to who exactly is paying the tariffs, or will we have to wait until a full quarter comes out and you see what the margins are and you see how it translates?
Yeah, I think Apple, of course, they've given much less disclosure right now. So even ASPs and units on iPhone, we have to guess ourselves now too. So it makes it difficult to figure that out.